Hi, I'm Terry Murphy, Senior Editor for Realty Times, Women in Business, Women in Real Estate, and in the men's room with Murph. And we have a great man in the men's room. He's also in real estate. His name is Paul Wheeler, just made Master Coach at Workman Success, and is the broker owner of Accent Realtors. Now, he went ahead and did this fabulous video on listing presentation. And here's my thought was, we've got to amp that up. We've got to facelift it. We've got to jump it up and reignite it because I think you've been doing the same one for a long time. He's doing really well. And how many years in the business, Paul?
32 now.
Only 32 years in the business. And I remember trying to call him years ago, and they went, well, he'll have between 1248 and 110. Does that work? I'm like, oh, who is this guy?
Sorry about
That's
that.
why he's so good at what he does, and his style and his willingness for servant leadership is there to share with us some of his top 3 tips on how to give that listing presentation the update it needs in today's market. So, Paul, you've been doing this amazing work in Tulsa, yes?
Tulsa.
Yeah, and you read 100 books a year. I got to really get to work with you through the Workman Success coaching program. You're really committed to not only our industry, but the community and your family. And now it's evident in your legacy with your own team. So one of the things that you and I both, I'll say, are fanatics about is advancing skill set. How do we connect better? How do we do it more authentically, more transparently? And how does that make the consumer feel more comfortable? And that video did it for me. Your whole process was just as comfortable and engaging, but not salesy. Can I say that? What
Yes.
prompted you to put together a updated listing presentation step by step?
It's a great question, Terry. So it's interesting. Probably the biggest motivator is I'd be going on listing presentations and losing to other people, other agents.
I can't believe that, but go ahead.
I know. And so I started studying the psychology of presentations and everything I could learn about it. And what I realized is we shouldn't sell anything to anybody unless we know exactly what they need. So selling turned into asking questions for me. And then I also realized that nobody would hire me unless they trusted me. And clarity builds trust. So if I kept going in and bragging on myself and telling the prospect or the client that, oh, this is why you should hire me, it really wasn't working. Or as you say, well, I do that too. And just you're like every other agent. Well, me too, me too, me too. I do those things. And I quit talking about myself. And I thought, well, if I educated them so they could make great decisions, then they'd have clarity on what the process was and they'd build trust in me. And it's been phenomenal. It really, really works.
Well, I know you take an enormous amount of business from that area. Tell me how many listings in a year. Now, I know this year's been a little different because we've just gone through that huge
Yeah.
transition. But I mean, is it normal for you guys to take listings? I mean, is that what you do?
Yeah. In fact, at the point of my career right now, 32 years in, my goal is still to sell one house a week. But I do it in just 3 work days with a couple hours a day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, of selling. And then I coach all day Thursdays and then spend Friday on project work and with my family and the weekends and we travel 8 to 12 weeks a year too. And so I do all of that selling in just a very small amount of time because of the focus that I have.
And I want to share that with, as having been a realtor when I remember, I mean, a full-time realtor, an active realtor. And I would hear people go, well, I don't work on weekends. I'm like, what? I mean, it was a 24, I would literally be sitting on the side of my bed in my suit going, should I? It's like, okay, I think other people are sleeping. So you have a process. And I went through the entire thing and I thought, my God, I took notes and notes and notes. There were 3 things that were apparent to me. the pace that you built the trust with, the way you profiled yourself as not a me too, because all of us do some of the same things, put it in MLS, put up a sign,
Right.
the me too thing, but how you demonstrated and articulated the value, and then how comfortable it was for them to make the decision and your process. So tell us, what do you think your first step is if you were sharing this with the world, which is what you're doing? What would be your first step as a tip for people who are listing and not winning those listings?
Okay, so it's a wonderful question. I can think of a lot of things, but probably the biggest game changer for me was T-tape. And T-tape is an acronym. And so when you start any kind of meeting or presentation, you're not going to build trust or give the client clarity unless they know what to expect. So T-tape does that. So the first T is thank you, and we always want to remember our manners. So thank you for having me as a guest in your home. The second T is time. And usually what I would say in the next few minutes, we want to accomplish three things. And actually, it's two things. I'm sorry. So we want to accomplish two things. So that's the A, TTA. And the two things we want to accomplish is to make sure I understand exactly what you want to accomplish. It's what you need. And so that allows me to serve them, right? And then the second thing we want to accomplish is to make sure that you're comfortable in my ability. So I'm not a high pressure salesman. I'm educating them and giving them clarity so they can make decisions. Okay, so TTA, and then the P is in order to get clarity on what you want to accomplish, I'll probably want to ask a few more questions even after the 25 questionnaire that I do on the phone or my team does on the phone before I get there. And then I say, and at the end of our time together, we'll at least have a next step. And it might be, gosh, Paul, let's list this house and get it sold. And the other is, I might decide to stay here for another 5 years. And I say either one is okay with me as long as we stay focused on what's best for you. And I say, assuming that you're comfortable in my ability, right? And so we lay out the whole meeting, which is only 15 to 20 minutes long from that point forward, but they know exactly what to expect.
Well, asking permission to ask questions really opens the door to some, and I just didn't want to miss that, what that P stood for. And then you actually go through a tour with the house. Mm-hmm. And I think we miss that a lot because depending on your behavioral style, a lot of people go right to the table and they start, beleaguering these people, all the stuff that they're going to do. Right. Tell us a little bit about what happens during that time.
So during the tour, I think it's professional and respectful to take notes. And again, remember, selling is asking questions. And so we're getting details on not only the home, but more on their motivation and just building rapport. It's pretty basic, but I ask the common sense stuff, like, will this stay with the property and that type of thing. I don't do the serial numbers like you used to, Terry, but I'm not as good as you. But really, that's just a warm up of just a little bit of conversation before we actually sit down at the table. And so it's a get to know them a little bit more. And again, I need to see the house, so let's do it while we're getting to know each other. So.
Well, because may I mention that during that time, I would have evaluated, do I even want this listing? And the reason for that is because it's a two-way street. I'm going to do all of these things, but then this is the job. And I know you come up with that later towards the end of the meeting. So tell us your next biggest tip for upping your listing presentation.
Okay, so the next thing is back to education versus selling. So I don't talk about myself at all. I think the only thing I talk about is once we go into the presentation, I go, before we get into what I promise you, which is a high-level overview of the real estate market, I think you're a better seller when you understand what's going on. And then the fundamentals of real estate, I always say, if you do A, B, and C, D will always happen, and D is the sale. And after 32 years, I tell my clients there is never, ever, ever a reason we should not sell. ever, no matter what kind of market. So I'll share those with you. And then the last thing I'll share with you is we'll look at your neighbors and we'll look at what we call the CMA, comparative market analysis. So we'll try to decide based on what you have compared to the neighbors and what they sold for, what the market value is going to be. And market value is the highest price someone's willing to pay. And so I go into that education process, but the only time I talk to myself or talk about myself is I say, before I get into those things, I want to share one thing that's different about us, and that's that we have a team. And so we don't do the individual agent type business. In our market, the average agent sells 4 homes a year. No kidding, 4 homes a year. And I say, I sold that many last week. And so the reason we use a team is this, that, and the other thing. And so we explain that. But then after that, it's done. No marketing stuff, no nothing.
No, but you do talk about that later in the process, because the first thing they're looking for is, what are you going to sell my house for? And you're like, did I leave my crystal ball in the car?
Yeah, you like that, eh?
Yeah, I liked it because it kind of set the pace for the fact that it's not my opinion.
Right.
Of it. It shows what the market and the buyer will bear. And I think that had I learned that earlier, because you're always afraid to go, well, nothing sold over, X amount of dollars. And they're like, but my house has custom cabinets. And you're like, yeah, but they're orange, so,
Right.
So it's that kind of thing. And if there was one third one that you'd like to share with Realty Times, what would that be?
That's probably a good one, and that's pricing. And I tell people, I talk to so many agents that say, oh my gosh, how do you price a home?
It's hard.
It is hard, and you can't do it exactly, or it's rare. And if you price it exactly where the market's gonna pay, it was luck, because you're not writing the check, right? The buyer is. So how can you guesstimate what the buyer is going to be exactly? So usually what I say is, look, we're looking for market value. And at the end of looking at this CMA, I'm going to give you a range. And so generally I'll say, we're probably going to sell right in this range based on the data that I see. And so the question you want to ask yourself is, okay, if you can sell in that range, is it good for you? If it's not, don't do it. If it is, and you're comfortable with my ability, then let's get your property on the market. And so I give them the range, and nobody ever tries to get me to say, well, where's it going to sell exactly? And if they do, and usually in talking about the range, I go, look, I don't have a crystal ball like you had mentioned. And who determines market value? It's the buyer. And unless I'm writing the check, I don't know exactly where they're going to come in at. But I will tell you this, the market responds in a certain way. So within 2 weeks in our market, and that changes over time, in COVID, it was 3 days, right? And, in a slower, more sluggish market, it might be 3 weeks, 4 weeks at the most. But within that amount of time, we're going to have an offer or an answer. And if we get an offer, the market has spoken and says, yeah, you were close enough, so we got the offer. But if we don't have an offer, they're going to tell us why. And then we just respond to the why. Well, if it's price, then let's move the price. If it needs a new roof, let's put a new roof on it, whatever. And so they never come back to me and say, but you told me, because they used to do that. You told me it was going to sell right here. And I'm like, no, I just picked that price in the beginning. And so you lose the listings. I said to someone recently, I haven't had an expired listing in 5 years. It's just amazing. Now, granted, it was a COVID market, right? But yeah, it's they listen to you. They listen to the market, is what they do.
Well, you help them listen to the market,
Right.
because I think so often they think that we should know how to price a property. And the fact is, it's always been a range, because your property might be beautiful and the comparative might have been more beautiful or smaller or whatever. But, one of the things that you and I talked about is it's a price war and a beauty pageant. So, again, we don't determine that, the buyers do. And if they don't get an offer, I love the way you said the market speaks.
Right.
Because, when I hear agents, when we coach and say, oh, it's been on for 3 months, I'm like, why? Unless it's a problem with the showing. So these are great tips. And I really appreciate the fact that you would share them. I know that you have a program that offers these kinds of things. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I established a platform to promote this selling style a long, long time ago, and I recently took it down. We've got all the material, and we share it, and we train on the team with it actually, and it's called Servant Heart Selling, and it takes all these concepts of just adding value to our clients so they can make great decisions, and it's just a better way of selling. I always say the old ABCs of selling, always be closing, are replaced by always be contributing or always be
Serving.
connecting.
Yeah.
And not only does it work a whole lot better, and I think I shared with you, Terry, one time I was up against 15 other realtors. So this engineering couple, both engineers, interviewed 15 people, and I still got the listing. And I went, wow, this really works. It's interesting, but it's a much, so it works, but it's a much more joyful way to sell. I just, it's so much more pleasant. I don't get pushback. My sellers, just tell me this every week. We'll just do what you say. And just what would you do, Paul? We trust you. And so it's just, you're leading people, you're making friends, you're building relationships, and you're helping them make great decisions. And your total focus is on them. And there's just
Well,
no
see,
resistance.
so I know that we're going to figure out how to update your training platform because having both of us having been in the business since a long time, I don't want to say how long. Um,
But we started when we were 10, right?
we yeah, yeah, walking people from house to house was so strenuous. But you have these core values, and that comes through with how you present to both buyers and sellers. Obviously, when we started, there were no teams, but we know that the consumer has more demands. If you're listening to this, you need to know the consumer has changed. Real estate changes slower. And what you're talking to here is a master coach who walks the talk every day, who deals with it, and is coaching for a reason because he helps people see how to connect in a way that is much more valuable, differentiated, and much more confident. And that comes from the servant selling. So, Paul, what's the best way to reach you?
It is probably by email, Paul Wheeler at accentrealtors.com.
Yeah, I hope you'll join us again because there's so many more facets to what Accent does with and has done for years. The community service, your commitment to the industry, your commitment to your family. That real estate's often been said that it's to be full time, you can't have anything else, and you've proven annoyingly that it is totally possible because you have organized your business like a business, and that's why you're such a good coach. I'm so glad you all joined us, and thank you, Paul. Join us again for another segment on Realty Times on how you can be the rock star of your marketplace. I'm Terry Murphy. Join us again soon.
Thanks, Terry.